welcome to this week's edition of Political Smackdown. I'm Andy Debman, I'm your host this week. We got our usual crew, and the permanent substitute, Roger Harris, is in for Betsy this week. Good to have you back with us again, Roger. All right, let's get on with it, folks. This week marks 24 years since the 9/11 attack on America and specifically the World Trade Center and our country at large. You'd have to go back to Pearl Harbor to find an event that had such a dramatic effect on our country and how we live and view the world. Where were you and what do you remember about that day? Mike, start us off. I mean, it's kind of odd. I was reading an article about, and you'll appreciate this, Roger, about history teachers and how they're trying to, how to teach this. And it's hard to believe there's kids that were not alive when this happened. This is like Vietnam for some age groups and all.
There's 24-year-olds that weren't born.
That's right.
So, well, Andy, I remember clearly where I found out about it. As was often the case, I would go to the real estate office somewhere around 7:30, 8 o'clock. As you know, I've always been a fairly early person. And I would check whatever I had to check, and then my routine was to go to City Hall between 8:30 and 9, check in with the city manager, see if there's anything I needed to know or do, see if I had anything on my desk from the day before or whatever. And when I walked into the administrative wing on Wash Street of City Hall, there was then the office on the left. It was occupied by Joyce Fortenberry, who was in the finance department, and she said, "Have you heard about the attack?" And I said, "No, what attack?" And so she proceeded to tell me. And I hung around there a while, and I don't remember if it was there when I got back and turned the TV on. I had it at the office, but when the second tower was hit, and then I remember watching them fall. In fact, the one hit second fell first, if you remember. And it was just a tragic day. And then, of course, not long after that, the Pentagon was hit. And we had the people that were heroic that lost their lives but had to crash into a field in Pennsylvania. What was it they were going to hit? They were going to hit another big building.
They thought they were going to the White House.
Yeah. So that was by far in our lifetime the largest attack, war, terror, whatever you call it, on the homeland. And we had a miracle sort of happen for 2 or 3 or 4 years after that. The country kind of pulled together for a while. That was how big it was, that people forgot about their politics enough to figure out we have got to be together on this.
Well, Roger, as a history teacher, I know this was probably one of the biggest things that you probably could remember in your life that had such a dramatic effect on really the way we live.
Yeah, and the whole world, you're right. And it's interesting, you compare it to Pearl Harbor, more people died on 9/11 than died at Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor had about 2,400 fatalities, and World Trade Center and Washington had 3,000. I was assistant principal at Crest High School, and I remember the secretary came in and said a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And I just remember thinking, oh, well, I bet that pilot is dead then. It was got to be a little Cessna or something. I had no idea that it was a jetliner, and TVs all over the school were tuned in. My son was actually in college in Philadelphia that day, and he said his shock was when the commercial plane stopped. He said seeing American fighter jets flying patrol over a major American city, and how surreal that was in Philadelphia to have those fighter jets there. One of the things I remember that I honestly felt dumb about later was that afternoon there was a line of parents coming in Crest High School to check their kids out. And it was one after another checking their kids out. And I remember stupidly thinking, well, this is dumb. That Washington, D.C. was attacked and New York was attacked. Do they think Lattimore is third? But I realize now, and did later that day, that when something like that happens, you just want to hug your kids. You want your family around you. They weren't afraid that Crest High School was going to be attacked. They just needed to hug their kids. And that was one of the moments that struck to me, that people just needed their family around them and just went to school and got their kids because they needed a hug.
That's it. Wes?
Well, I was at the print shop. We just moved out on the highway. And somebody in the back apparently had a radio on, heard it, came up to the office. I had a very small TV, all I could afford to buy in my little shop at the time. And it was old-fashioned, no remote, 3 channels, and immediately tuned it in before the second tower was hit, I think. And we all crowded my little office and watched the coverage. I mean, everything stopped for a while. But what a tragedy. And then later had a young lady that worked for me who had been an airline stewardess who lived in New York at the time and was actually could watch the towers fall from her balcony. But yeah, I think the big takeaway is how that did unite the country, at least for a little while. Nothing like a common enemy, which that was.
Well, I was in the house at the time, and that's when it's funny. We was talking about the budget earlier. We were stuck in one of those long times trying to get a budget. Well, there wasn't anything going on Monday. It was on a Tuesday, so I didn't go. I stayed home and left on Tuesday morning early, and it was a pretty fall morning. It was cool. Well, I listened to audiobooks because it was a long ride getting there. So I was listening to audiobook, didn't have the radio on. Well, a friend of mine that helped me on the campaign called me on my cell phone, and she was crying and screaming and carry on. Have you heard? Have you heard? I said, heard what? I said, I'm listening to the audiobook. And she was telling me about they've attacked the World Trade Center. I said, what are you talking about? So I said, I popped out the cassette and I was listening to the radio. Then I don't know what made me do it, but I sort of started looking around in the air. Then I noticed I was the only person on the interstate. I felt like one of those science fiction movies. I was the last person left on the world. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I kept going on towards Raleigh, and I got to Raleigh. And Wes, you've been there enough times when you're supposed to be in session. It was deserted. So I finally got to the building, and it looked like an armed camp.
I bet.
And that was before we even had any IDs or anything. It's just based on, well, I know Representative Dedman, and they finally let me in. And it was insane. They assigned, security to the speaker and the pro tem, and I've just never seen anything like it in my life.
And there was so much unknown there for several days. What's the next step? Where's the next plane coming from? And it reminds me, after Pearl Harbor, a month later, they moved the Rose Bowl from Pasadena to Duke University. Duke was playing in the Rose Bowl that year because nobody knew exactly what was going on. There was a fear of an invasion of the West Coast, and I think we felt the same thing on the East Coast. Everybody holed up, and nobody knew what was going on.
No, they didn't. And if you remember, I remember when Andy Card, the chief of staff to President Bush, he was in Florida in some elementary school reading the kids, and he came and whispered it to, and that was the weirdest look on his face. It looked like he was having a stroke. I mean, the way because he was trying to comprehend. How do you even process something like that?
The words that he whispered in his ear were, "The United States is under attack." And then back
and he was criticized for at least finishing the sentence with the young people, the children, which I thought was the right thing to do. He needed some time, and he didn't need to generate more fear than existed.
Well, and I thought that was the only thing he could do. But the one thing they found out, I would have thought Air Force One could have handled any communication at all. They found out what a weak spot Air Force One was. They couldn't communicate one thing. You would have thought that the president could communicate to the country, and he couldn't. They had to pick up broadcast TV station as they hopscotch across the country. I mean, that's crazy.
It's crazy. He got his news the same way we did.
He sure did. I mean, it's insane to even think about that. But now we found out that I think all of that has been remedied now that we have seen the weak spots that they had. And I mean, then...
Let's hope so.
Well, but then the vice president, he was in the bunker. Then they've had him, they were flying the president all over the country, literally, because they didn't know where it would be safe to put him. So I don't know. That was just a terrible thing. It was a horrible day, but we've lived and we've learned. So anyway, moving on to our second question. Cleveland County School Board met this week. And what would have been a rather lackluster meeting changed when Mr. Kenneth Lefferts wanted to talk about having a pay raise was discussed that he had brought forth and thought it was time to talk and got it on the agenda. And then he talked a little bit about it, then decided he didn't want to talk about it because some people were missing, and he felt like the whole board should talk about it. So, really, Wes, what was all this about? And why is this something right before you start filing for election you want to talk about having a pay raise?
Yeah, I think that was the wrong time to do it. I've watched it a couple of times, and I'll defer details to Mr. Harris as a former school board member and a better parliamentarian than I, but Mr. Ledford tried to table it until everyone was there. There were 2 members out, which I do think is wise. If you're going to vote a pay raise, everybody needs to have
put everybody on record.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody needs to be on record. But anyway, it was handled. It honestly didn't take long, and I think this may not be the last we'll see of it from what I'm hearing.
Well, it was kind of a convoluted mess, it sounded like, because it wasn't real clear, but
And I never could find a copy of the agenda online.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the agenda actually said. It looks like on their board doc system that you're familiar with, Mr. Harris, we used at the college. The last entry I saw for agendas was, I think, the June meeting. So I'm not sure why that wasn't publicly published, but and maybe it was, I just couldn't find it.
well, I've had some trouble finding stuff on there too at some times, so I don't know what it is. Well, Mike, it was kind of interesting, even though we talked about the pay raise, and then Mr. Lefford wanted to talk about Marion School, which I was a little confused about that because Marion School's been closed for some time now, and he said, well, you know, some of us weren't here when that was decided, and said, I think we need to put it on the agenda for next month's meeting. I'm just confused.
Well, they still own Marion School because the county didn't want it, is my understanding.
That's my understanding.
So they're having to keep the grass cut, maybe make sure the building doesn't leak and fall in and that kind of stuff. So there
Right.
is some expense associated with
Oh,
Marion
yeah,
School.
there is, no doubt.
Just on a side note, at least my understanding is that Gaston Christian School would have probably bought that property, and it wouldn't have gone to Kings Mountain, but the school board chose not to sell it to a Christian school. But that would have been a great location for them, because they had to leave Elizabeth, and so they found the building that a couple folks had remodeled, the old school in Kings Mountain. That's where they're at, but it's not as centrally located in the county, and it's close to Gaston. That's another issue. But back to the pay raise, and I don't know what they're gonna do about Marion School, but all they can do is sell it if the county doesn't want it, right,
Yeah,
Roger?
right.
Yeah, that's all they
They
can
just
do.
got whatever the market will bear for whatever purpose, and where it's sitting right in the heart of a significant residential area, not just everything can get approved to go there.
No.
A school obviously can, a church obviously can, maybe some type of office work, if it's not too much traffic, could get.
In other words, if they have an
conditional
opportunity, if they have a willing buyer, they probably ought to be a willing seller.
use.
But my understanding, I was trying to, does he have an idea of what he wants to do with it, or?
I have no idea. I've not talked to Mr. Ledford in some months, so I don't know. But it'll be interesting discussion when it happens, and something else that we can probably discuss. But I'm just curious about why in September, before filing starts for at least 2 of the 3 people, that you would talk about raising the school board's own compensation.
Well, and that's what I don't understand. I mean, my understanding is they make $450 a month and $50 for
Yeah, 500
travel
total
allowance.
is what
Yeah,
I'm told.
total 500.
And I'd say, Roger, you'd know more than me, I'd say that's probably somewhere in the range of counties our size, some probably a little more, maybe some a little less, I don't know. It's hard to find those numbers online, I found this week. I did find out that in a big system, if it's accurate and current, and I think it is, or within a year or so, Durham County, which is much larger and one of the highest paid, the members get $16.67 a month, which is a little over 3 times. And then the chairman gets a couple hundred more than that. But some small boards, from what I read, still take no compensation. And I can remember, Roger, when Cleveland County Schools and old Cleveland County Schools didn't get compensation, if my memory's correct.
I was not aware of that.
I'm not sure of that, but I think it goes back a while before that. But anyway, I don't know, but apparently if Mr. Lefford wanted to discuss it, he must want it. And if Mr. Blanton wanted to discuss it, who wasn't there. He had a death in the family. That's why he wasn't there. Mr. Fisher wasn't there. I have no idea how he stands on it, but he's had surgery and been out. But at least 2 or 3 members think they probably ought to get more compensation and are willing to vote to do so. But what became clear when they finally had a vote, only 2 voted to table it and 5 voted not to table it. So it's pretty clear that the majority of the board, at least 5 and maybe another one, are not ready to do that. But
Right.
there is a way to handle that type of thing and never have to handle it again, which is basically, if you're getting $500 a month and you give the employees a 3% COLA, just adopt a policy that you get the same raise percentage-wise the schools got, and then never have to vote on it again.
Well, that's going to be funny to see. Roger, we got to take a break, but we'll come right back to you when we come back from the break.
Hi, I'm Deb Harden, host of For Your Information. The goal of our show is to educate and entertain you about all things pets throughout Cleveland County. We have various guests joining me each month to talk about dogs, cats, pigs, whatever kind of pet you can think of. Also each month, we will be joined by some furry friends looking for their forever homes. For your information each month, right here on C19 TV and online at www.c19.tv.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
And welcome back to the second half of Political Smackdown. All right, Roger, we come back to you talking about the school board.
Well, I don't have much to add to the conversation. In my judgment, about 2/3 of the school board are made up of serious men and a woman doing the best they can. And about 1/3 of them, in my judgment, are just not serious people. But what I'd like to do is in addition to the 3-ring circus, is point out something that related to schools that did come out in the last week, and that is the school performance grades were released by DPI. And Cleveland County made some amazing progress. Whenever the DPI cover story came out, 2 systems across the state were mentioned for special recognition, and that was Nash County and Cleveland County. And just some amazing growth and accomplishment by Cleveland County schools that I think we need to give attention to. And without getting too deep into the woods, there's basically 2 measures. There's a performance measure, which is sort of achievement, how well did the kids do, and then there's another measure called growth. Just like a child that physically grows a year in 3rd grade ought to physically grow a year in his reading ability and math ability. So that's sort of what growth is. And you know, when you look at A's, B's, and C's, those are proficient under the school standards. And Cleveland County just made some amazing growth, and the numbers are published. It includes charter schools as well as the traditional public schools. When you look at our high schools, Burns and Crest and Kings Mountain and Pinnacle and Shelby all made grades of C's. Those are proficient in each one of those high schools, but only one high school in Cleveland County, that's Cleveland Early College High School, made a grade of A. They get the blue ribbon this year, and I don't remember, but it's about the 3rd or 4th year in a row that Cleveland Early College has gotten an A. Low performing schools defined by DPI, those are those that have a D or an F and don't meet certain reading standards. Last year, Cleveland County had 9 low performing schools. This year it's down to 2. That is amazing growth, and those 2 elementary schools are 2 of our poorest schools. Of course, poverty has a lot of baggage that goes with it. 65% of the schools in Cleveland County met or exceeded growth. 92% of all schools in Cleveland County, including the charter school, were proficient in their ABCs. 92%. State average is 65%. So just some amazing growth, amazing proficiency that we saw in Cleveland County schools, and our teachers and our principals and our students and staff are doing some amazing work, and sometimes that does not get noted.
Yeah, that is
I'm going to
true.
quote Jeff Foxworthy about Roger. When you can say all these good things at one time, you might have been a public school teacher.
and proud to be.
Oh, my goodness.
Proud to be.
Well, those
That is a good report, I'll tell you.
that is a good report. It surely is. All right, let's move on to the next one. And it's on a sad note, but it's unbelievable to me. Here we have another political shooting in America. Activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated this week. It seems like it's just open season on anybody who voices a political opinion. Here we've had Gabby Giffords, a Democrat who was shot, terribly hurt. Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania had the governor's mansion firebombed. President Trump himself was shot. And the list just seems like it keeps going on and on and on, that there seems to be no tolerance for anybody who has a difference of opinion with people. Wes, how in the world are we going to ever have any difference of opinion in the public square if you've got to be concerned about some idiot that's going to pull a gun and shoot you?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to do is decide what it is you're discussing. You know, there have been so many comments about Kirk individually following the assassination, but the problem's so much deeper. This event overshadowed a school shooting in Colorado, the horrific stabbing in Charlotte, and at least 6 murders in Chicago. Difference is the Kirk assassination was politically motivated, but Andy, I would argue that the others were politically driven by bad policies. It's not simply tolerance of different opinions, it's much more than that. Our elected officials have said, in light of this, we must come together as Americans, but they and others can't agree on what is Americanism. Some even hold office or running on platforms that are diametrically opposed to what most of us would define as Americanism. Communication and tolerance are important, but we have to know what we're communicating about. As it becomes more and more difficult to define what is Americanism, the gulf widens, passions grow stronger, and violence continues. And whether it's politically motivated or whether it's politically driven by un-American policies, the only optimism that arises within me right now is that the vast majority of us at least have some understanding of Americanism. But I'm afraid, Andy, that majority is shrinking.
Roger?
Well, it is awful, and it just seems to, as you say, it seems to go on and on and on. It just continues. Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, last Christmas that was killed, and it seems to me the bad guys fall into one of two camps, and we've talked about the political assassins, and a lot of times that's it. Sometimes it's not political assassination; it's just nut jobs, just crazy people. You know, the guy that shot Ronald Reagan, that was not a political attempt. He was trying to impress an imaginary girlfriend, Jodie Foster, and the guy that attacked Paul Pelosi, that was just a nut with a hammer that came in. So sometimes it's political assassins and sometimes it's nut jobs, but there seems to be obviously much more political polarization in the country. There seems to be tolerance of violence. As Wes said, you know, there'll be a school shooting and it doesn't even make the front page of the newspaper anymore. There's a tolerance of that. And one of the challenges I guess we've got in modern life is every family has always had that crazy uncle that had the crazy ideas. But now that crazy uncle can sit in his lazy boy and get on the internet and put his crazy ideas and poison out, and it's read by 10,000 people. The country needs better health care, better mental health care. We need controlled weapons of war, and we need for people to tone down the hyper-partisan rhetoric. It's okay to have disagreements. We do that on this show, but we leave as friends. And there ought to be a way that you can figure out how to do that. Only an idiot would choose his friends by what their politics are. And we've got to figure out a way that we can tolerate differences of opinion without losing friendships or doing something even worse.
Mike?
Well, I've not followed Charlie Kirk all that closely through the last 10 years that he's been on the rise, but he has built an amazing network, primarily ministering or lecturing or whatever on college campuses. And this was at a college campus, the largest one in Utah, I believe, where he got shot. But I've watched enough of his clips to think he's matured a lot. And there are a lot of people who believe that he is the primary responsible person / organization for switching the youth vote so much towards Trump last year that helped him win at least Arizona and Wisconsin, if not others. So he's been very influential in going into, he goes right into what we would call the belly of the beast, the universities. And he tries to persuade people that they are being misled, and he basically is giving orthodox evangelical answers. I mean, he's pro-life. He believes there's two sexes God created, and he argues those points with people and does it in a good way when I have seen him. And if they're want to, he has great dialogue with them, and that's what he was about to do, and it just started doing when all of a sudden somebody from 200 yards away shot him. So I don't know what the answer is, but well, I do know the answer is that more of us need to have a faith system that is more meaningful in our lives. That's the big thing.
Well,
But,
this is just
it's a tragedy. Here's a man 31 with a wife and 2 young children whose children will never see grow up and have their dad.
it's just totally unbelievable what happened. But Lord, times we live in. All right, let's go to our lightning round. Wes, what you got for us?
Well, sort of as a follow-up on that, this week I'm reminded of Robert Kennedy's words following the assassination of Dr. King at a time when the nation appeared to be so deeply divided. They're even more poignant today than they were in 1968. He said, "This is a difficult day. This is a difficult time for the United States. It is perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and in what direction do we want to move."
Roger?
I was a guest on this show 2 weeks ago, and I pointed out the General Assembly still had not passed its budget. Well, here we are 2 weeks later. Nothing has changed. The budget was due July the 1st. It's now September the 12th, and they've not turned in their homework yet. Teachers and state employees are waiting on raises in the face of continuing inflation. Retired teachers and state employees make less this year than they did last year. The Children's Hospital is on hold. Speaker Hall and Senator Berger, your homework was due July the 1st. You're 73 days late. Do your job.
Michael?
What was the latest y'all were, Andy, when you were in the charge?
October.
Say about Halloween, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools are the 4th largest school system in the state. They spent $330-some million that they didn't have and had a $46 million budget deficit this year. They've laid off over 350 people or so. And the state auditor did an audit and found things that their own auditor didn't find. He went to the State Board of Education, the LGC, it turns out, something I never had to do in 12 years, have now ordered another outside audit from an independent party to help them figure out what to do. But the big thing they did was spend a lot of COVID money and made permanent positions with money that was one time, which is a no-no.
That's a no. All right, Wes, you ready for mine?
Yeah, you want a drum roll?
Yeah, go ahead. All right, let's go back to the 80s, back when Wes had a mullet for his hair.
I never had a mullet.
All right, real quick. Ain't gonna believe this, but last week, Oliver North and Fawn Hall, go back to remember, they got married, believe it or not. They have this guy been disconnected for years. His wife passed away. She came to a funeral. A year later, they got married. Believe it or not, but it happened last week.
And Oliver North is 81 years old.
Yep, sure is. All right, folks, that's all the time we got this week. Hope you learned something. We'll be back again next week with a new edition of Political Smackdown.